J.B. Pritzker named some members of his team, and a very political year is coming to an end. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. Getting to the end of a year, it's been interesting, but a lot on the horizon. We're going to talk about today with a couple of, shall I say, old hands at this? Kent Redfield is back, Professor Emeritus, that's where the old comes in, yes, of Political Science, University of Illinois, Springfield. Welcome back, Kent.
Good to be here.
And Dave Dahl, the ever-youthful Dave Dahl of WTAX Radio in Springfield. Welcome back, Dave.
Hello.
So, as we start to do this show today, J.B. Pritzker has made some announcements of some people we know and some people that we'll get to know. Among those that he named as part of his new administration, which will take office in early January, former Illinois Comptroller Dan Hines is a deputy governor, Christian Mitchell, a state representative who has recently served as acting executive director of the state Democratic Party as a deputy governor, and Jesse Ruiz, who ran for attorney general in the Democratic primary and didn't make it out of the pack, but also is now president of the Park Board of Chicago area, I think that's Chicago Park District or Cook County, and he used to run the State Board of Education as their volunteer chairman. Any thoughts about some old and some new? Of course, Dan Hines was at he's heading one of the transition committees as well, but we're seeing a little bit of somebody that we know.
Well, it is experienced people. Dan Hines was comptroller. He is a part of the Hines family. That his father, Thomas Hines, was Senate president and
then Cook County assessor.
Cook County assessor. And Christian Mitchell, in addition to being state representative, has been the executive director of the Democratic Party of Illinois and took over at a time when there was a lot of discontent about how the party was being run and the role that Speaker Madigan was playing. And I think it's very high marks for how he handled that. And then Ruiz is someone that is has connections, Park District, School Board, State. There's Chicago. So this is an experienced team. This is not a shake-up Springfield. Maybe it's more of a fixed Springfield. And so if you're looking for some continuity back to times when perhaps the state government was in a little better shape, there certainly are some connections there.
What's Hines been doing the last 4 years, practicing law?
Well, Dan Hines is a senior executive with UBS Asset Management, which is UBS is one of the big international banks. So he's been in kind of high finance. They say he's a senior executive there and was comptroller for 12 years. As we might recall, he
ran for governor.
He ran for governor. He also ran for U.S. Senate. In the primary, he lost to Barack Obama. And what I remember about that in particular is that after he lost to Barack Obama, he became a great advocate for him. I think he traveled for him. He was he realized that, there was something good there. And he also, was strongly for Obama for president at the time.
I've always wondered about this. We have a governor and we have a lieutenant governor, and there's a chief of staff to the governor, and there are deputy governors. I'm wondering where one ends and one begins.
Yeah, and Kent could talk perhaps about the makeup, but I think we've seen, and certainly, we had an education czar, like they even called her a secretary for a while under Governor Rauner, but sometimes you have deputy governors who are in the governor's office who oversee various agencies or various portfolios, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah,
Kent, that's not uncommon over time, right?
No, not to have certain people, either staff people that have oversight over a cluster of agencies. And so it's really, each governor, you're managing this huge enterprise and all of these employees, and you have to figure out, how do you know what's going on, how do you get things done, and yet not spend 24 hours a day micromanaging each department and stuff. So it's a huge organizational task, besides the fact that the state has no money and is falling apart and you've got to do all of these policy things, you also have to put some type of management organization in place. And as we've seen at the federal level, sometimes there can be a lot of glitches in terms of getting the right people in place.
And certainly I know deputy governors often have a certain number of agencies that report to them. It's kind of an organizational chart, so it goes up the chain to the gov.
Well, here's something that I think gives people optimism about J.B. Pritzker, that he's going to listen to these people, and if they tell him no, or if they say, Governor, you're going to look stupid if you do such and such, he would actually listen. And I don't think—
Well, that's at least the impression he gives us.
I don't think we've had that with Rauner, Quinn, Blagojevich.
Well, certainly not Rauner and Blagojevich.
Yeah.
And Quinn had a lot of his own thoughts, but I think he took counsel. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's just, this is a leap of faith with someone who's never run a large-scale bureaucracy, even though he comes from the private sector, and someone who's never held public office. And so one always wants to be hopeful, and there certainly are some good signs in terms of the people he's talking to and the discussions about, well, we're going to negotiate these issues and things, which he's got a wing of the party and people in the legislature who just say, we got the votes, let's put it up there and move on, and boom, right to $15 an hour for minimum wage.
Yeah, although even he has said that would take several years.
Oh, no.
Small businesses.
Yeah, what he's saying is he wants to negotiate it, and he's certainly getting some pushback from some of the members of the legislature who just, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead on this stuff. I
know Dave mentioned this, but about Christian Mitchell, he's a state representative from Chicago. I know he was an advisor to, I guess, Tammy Duckworth's U.S. Senate campaign. The Democratic Party of Illinois for a long time, even if you look at their website, has not really been technologically up to date. They've had such a power base under Mike Madigan that they haven't had to do certain things to modernize. And I just think that when they did bring in Christian Mitchell in recent months, when Madigan was in trouble over the Me Too movement and how they've handled complaints, Mitchell is just a good face of the party. He did some public things, having some press conferences around the state, the kind of thing that Mike Madigan certainly doesn't do as chairman of the party very often. Very, very seldom does he speak in public. And Christian Mitchell was a good face, so we'll see if certainly we'll see if the Democratic Party, with Christian Mitchell moving on to the Pritzker administration, continues to improve kind of the way they communicate. But I think Mitchell is a good choice, as someone who really can relate to an audience in addition to, getting some things done.
And can tell the governor how the legislature works.
No, there's also true. I should mention the other people who were named in this. Nikki Budzinski will be a senior advisor to the Pritzker campaign, and she also worked for his exploratory effort and did strategy for the campaign and worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign. Alexis Sturm will be director of the Office of Management and Budget, and she is now director of cash management and bond reporting for the Comptroller's Office. And Aaron Guthrie, who is regional manager for Uber Midwest in Chicago, will be the head of Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, which is interesting. It's a startup company. They certainly have turned the taxi industry upside down as Uber has grown and had its own growing pains. So we'll see where things go. This all comes just to show that Illinois continues to have problems. There was a report just out in the last week that new census data shows that, I believe it was from 2017 to 18, or at least within the last year of reporting, Illinois lost 45,000 residents. This, of course, raises some alarm bells to some people because, like the Tribune story, talked to people in Florida who had decided to move out of Illinois because of the taxes, et cetera. Is this something that's just because we get cold, or obviously the tax climate, and can a stop be put to this? Politicians of both parties have talked about trying to stop the drain of folks away from Illinois.
Well, it's a huge problem. We are losing people. We certainly do not retain some of our young people that don't go to college, or if they go to college here, they don't stay. And those are, that you want to grow your population base, and you want to keep, people. You want younger people. You want people with good skills to build the workforce. So we've had some very disturbing trends in Illinois, and some of it is problems with government, some of it is reputation, very bad, the things we need to fix in the business climate, and just the chaos and the uncertainty have contributed dramatically to the problems of the state, not knowing whether or not you're going to have a state budget and all of the conflict and things. And so, there are some things that can be done pretty quickly in terms of turning some of that around. But to reverse those kinds of demographic trends, you really have to make some serious improvements in the business climate, in the political climate. And you just can't overstate the problems of that J.B. Pritzker is inheriting as he steps into the governor's office.
Dave, you don't have your property in Florida ready to go, do you?
Not just quite yet.
Okay.
But the surrounding states in the Midwest are gaining. It's not as if that Illinois is losing at a greater pace or gaining at a slower pace. Illinois is losing and the others are gaining.
Yeah, and I know that certainly from the conservative perspective, you had Governor Rauner saying during his campaign, if Pritzker gets elected and if we go to a different income tax system, the graduated income tax, kiss Illinois goodbye, and yet you have, I saw like a Twitter post from a more liberal group saying, look at some other states that have graduated income taxes but have a government that funds education better and funds their colleges better and is more not chaotic. State government is not a constant question of a battle between competing forces, but people working together. You can get things done, you can grow. Certainly that's what Pritzker is hoping for in this age, but again, we'll have to see how that goes. So
I guess we'll find out in 4 years, and then if it's not good, he's out. Right?
Well, one would think that. Speaking of being out, this broke late, I think after the last show that was done here, but it has come out in the last several days that, and it was through an interview that Governor Rauner did with Craig Wall on ABC-7 TV in Chicago, that the governor just kind of matter-of-factly said that, well, he knew he might lose, especially when Trump was elected in 2016. So as he's running in 2018, in the middle of the campaign, he asked 2 men and 2 women to maybe take over running for governor for him because he knew he was going to lose and he thought they could do better. It turns out that the people that he talked to, and of course this is much more complicated than just that, because if you're nominated through a primary like he was, and if you remove yourself from the ballot, then the state party has to get involved, and within like 8 days they have to name somebody. So everybody has to agree. The entire Republican State Central Committee would have had to agree. And people he named were Karen McConaughey, who was a former state senator from the suburbs, Erica Harold, who was running for attorney general at the time, and she was from Urbana, Todd Ricketts, one of the owners of the Cubs, and it turns out that the 4th person was the Republican National Committeeman from the suburbs. I think he also lives in Winnetka, where Rauner's chief home has been, Richard Porter. And McConaughey was one who just said this, everybody said no, and she said, this just shows the governor never really understood the process and how to get stuff done here. This is not the way to do it. And people like Jeannie Ives, who came within 3 points of the governor in the Republican primary for governor early this year, she basically said this shows how disappointing and how terrible and how he didn't get it, and he owes everybody an apology in the party, and she thinks the party's leaders now should resign because they didn't stop him from doing this if they knew, which they say they didn't, but some obviously might have. So what do what legacy does this leave?
This is pretty remarkable. I mean, we've had people withdraw from nominations for statewide office because of scandal. Scott Lee Cohen was a
he nominated for lieutenant governor
and Jack Ryan, that was the original person that was going to run against Barack Obama.
That's right.
And stuff. It's not there's not an understanding of the process. If he thought somehow he could anoint someone to take his place,
and he was trying to say he would give him a lot of money to run with.
And it just is very bizarre because, and probably somewhat disingenuous in terms of what he's saying, because, he spent a ton of money trying to knock Pritzker out with all of the Rod Blagojevich commercials and the toilet,
right.
tax commercials and all of those things. And once that was not successful, he did not put any new money in his campaign in 2017 or 2018.
But at the end of 2016, he put $50 million of
Right.
his own into
He put
it.
he put enough money in there that he thought he could win. It just shows it was about Rauner and not, and so the money did not flow into the Republican Party out to those candidates. Lots of suburban losses that you could attribute to money coming very late and not in a large enough amount. And so, if you were going to tank the whole process, which you could argue that he did, then to somehow say, well, I was trying to maneuver it so that the party could make a better effort. Party doesn't seem to be involved. This was all about Bruce Rauner and Bruce Rauner's ego.
And we'll see what happens now that, as he leaves government, we'll see.
The idea that for most of 2018, he ran and campaigned having actually thrown in the towel or tried to, that idea makes me think of Bob Newhart waking up next to Suzanne Plachette in the series finale, and in the last 4 years didn't happen. Of course, they did happen, but you hear that Rauner wanted to bail out. You think, well, what was that all about?
It's very odd and interesting. I don't know. It certainly doesn't add to the legacy. And
it is the legacy.
Yeah,
it is the legacy.
We'll see.
He wanted to quit,
and we'll see what happens to the party. I mean, clearly we're in a period of Democratic strength where Illinois voters, by the changes they made in the congressional delegation, seem not to like President Trump. President Trump, we assume is running in 2 years. We'll see what happens, though. So it's a strong time for Democrats in Illinois, in a state that has become more blue. But the pendulum swings, and if Pritzker raises taxes too much, or if there are scandals or problems that don't get fixed, then people will be looking for change in the next time around again.
Well, and one thing, hearkening back to our discussion of the census, which party loses a congressman?
Illinois probably will lose
and
one or two.
And it seems, there's no circumstances under which the Democrats are going to lose control of the legislature in 2020, and Pritzker will certainly survive 2 years of the governorship. So Democrats are going to draw the map. That will certainly help them mitigate anything that happens in
Also
terms
true.
of 2022.
Speaking of Democratic governors and Republican President Trump, Patty Blagojevich, the wife of former Governor Rod Blagojevich, who is continuing to serve his 14-year prison term for various corruption, which he kind of apologized for, but never really understood was any more than wheeling and dealing, and log rolling, and obviously there were tapes of him trying to get something in exchange for the golden opportunity of naming someone to Barack Obama's U.S. Senate seat. But Patty Blagojevich went on a Fox News program recently and talked about terrible federal prosecutors and what they've done to her husband. President Trump tweeted about it and said what a fine show that was and people should watch it. This raised questions again, as questions were raised a few months ago. Will the president possibly pardon or commute the sentence of Rod Blagojevich, who did appear on The Apprentice when Donald Trump was, fired him, partly because he couldn't, the governor at the time couldn't figure out how to type. But I just raised that issue because it's such an interesting and bizarre time. But Illinois members of Congress, the 7 Republicans, have written a letter in the past. I know Darren LaHood and Rodney Davis both signed it to the president saying, no, Rod Blagojevich is a bad guy. Don't let him out early. So we'll see what happens, because it was a very long sentence and he did not get any money, although he did. He was convicted of not everything, but asking
a number of serious crimes.
Yes,
and
asking for big campaign donations before he would allow state grants to go to places like a children's hospital.
This fits. I mean, the idea of prosecutors railroading, honest politicians or politicians is something that fits Trump's narrative in terms of how he's trying to deal with his current situation and all the investigations that are swirling around him. You would think there is absolutely no political upside to actually doing anything. Illinois is a very democratic state, and one of the things that most Illinoisans agree about is that Rod Blagojevich was a terrible governor and a crook. On the other hand, I think trying to guess what the president is going to do next, or taking a lot of stock in what the president said this morning, generally don't turn out to be, the best predictors of the future.
Yeah. Well, it is true that if he were to do something with Blagojevich, that would generate a news cycle, and it seems like the president does things that generate news cycles.
When you're on Fox News, everybody, including Mrs. Blagojevich, knows you are speaking directly to the president. Unlike this program, but just in case.
There you go. Thank you, Dave.
But
I think he appreciates
she was
it.
on a few months ago, and the governor was in Chicago Magazine with his white head of hair, and the governor, or the president, didn't pardon Blagojevich that time. Other than the president's unpredictable nature, what's changed since then?
I'm not sure, but as Kent said, things can change sometimes more than once a day in the direction that you see out of the White House. So we'll see what happens. Back to Illinois, although this was partly Illinois, but when we talked about problems that Speaker Madigan had, one of those problems that came out in the last several months and was an issue during the campaign was that there had been no legislative inspector general for a period of time. And then there was a former federal prosecutor named Julie Porter who has been doing that in the interim to go over a series of, I think it was more than 20 cases or complaints that needed to be checked out for potential either sexual harassment or other workplace harassment. This last week, it was announced that Carol Pope, who is a retired appellate judge from Petersburg, is going to be the new legislative inspector general. So perhaps we'll see some more continuity in that. And I know I've worked a little with Carol Pope in a couple of seminars that I participated in with her, and obviously, a long legal career and a good person. So we'll see where that goes. And I haven't heard a lot of reaction either way because the legislature hasn't been in, but I assume this will be a way to move forward from where we've been.
Yeah, this is a person that's highly regarded. It's a serious person, and with a lot of experience, and so I think people are very comfortable with the appointment. And they tried to rewrite the law in the Inspector General law in ways that would make it a better process, get a little more transparency in it. And that's really the question. I mean, if it depends on whether how well they have fixed the process or how well they let the process run. So I think she's perfectly capable, but we're talking about legislative ethics and legislative behavior with 177 independent operators
and their staffs,
which
is a lot of people,
and and four different partisan staffs and nonpartisan staff. I mean, it's a huge enterprise, and it's not the typical corporation where the president, the CEO can make things happen down the chain of command. And these people also run for office, and so you've got elections and you've got lobbyists. It's a very complex situation. So I'm certainly hopeful in terms of the appointment, and we'll see whether the process works better. It was probably designed not to work very well initially.
Yeah,
I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of complaints are left now that they've apparently cleared up the backlog and what have you. They've wintered out some people.
Yeah.
Not all of them, the ones who they were unfounded against.
Well, you hope, and of course we hope things are going so smoothly that nobody's saying the wrong thing or not keeping their hands to themselves. But we'll see where it goes. But human nature would say that perhaps people don't always learn so.
There's always one more than you counted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a broad range of behavior beyond just sexual harassment that can fall under the purview of this, and so it is. It's a difficult task, and I know the former, and I'm forgetting his name, the former legislator who was in the position expressed a lot of frustration.
Homer?
Yeah,
Homer?
Tom Homer
about dealing with the process and the inability.
Yeah, he was the inspector general for a while.
And
then
so
had left. Mm-hmm.
So we'll, hopefully, again, what they put in place will work better.
Okay. Well, I think I should note, as we tape this show, there's possibly at the end of, by the weekend, a federal shutdown. We don't know if Congress and the president will come together. That's a problem. But there was another interesting thing that happened at the federal level. The Senate, after years of trying, and I know Senator Durbin of Springfield has tried for 10 years to pass federal criminal justice reform, and actually had wonderful words in many venues that I saw for Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, because Jared Kushner was able to, whose father did some time in prison because Christie put him there for various crimes in the real estate business, but had a feeling for what was wrong with the criminal justice system. One of Durbin's big things was that years ago they made the punishment for owning crack cocaine a lot more, tangentially more than for powder cocaine, and that means people of color more often were doing a lot of prison time. And the Senate and the president, they've all gotten together to say, let's fix this. Dave, kind of an interesting thing to hear Dick Durbin say nice things about Jared Kushner, and you just never know what you're going to get.
Strange bedfellows in the spirit of the season.
Yeah. But also, this is federal people in federal prison, 10% of the nation's population. Most of the people in prison are involving state crimes and state prisons, but this does mirror reforms that have been passing through the General Assembly. There is a broad kind of criminal justice reform movement that is about both at the state and the federal level, and so you've got conservative and liberal groups for different reasons working on different parts of this.
And I think that when we do look back at Rauner's legacy, Governor Rauner, the one thing he worked well with Democrats, including Kwame Raoul, who's been a state senator and is the incoming attorney general, they worked together on criminal justice reform because the governor wanted to lower the number of people in prison and do restorative justice, and they did work well together on that. So the pendulum on all of that, including marijuana laws, which may become more open in Illinois, are swinging. With that, we wish everyone a happy new year and happy holidays. Kent Redfield and Dave Dahl, thanks for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next year on Capitol View.